The rain came down in sheets, each drop striking the cracked glass dome like a thrown pebble, as if the sky itself were trying to get her attention. Dr. Mara Voss stood motionless beneath the rusted skeleton of the 24-inch reflector, water dripping from the hem of her oilskin coat onto the concrete floor where it joined older puddles that had never quite dried since the funding was cut. The air smelled of rust, mildew, and the faint ozone tang of old electronics that had given up pretending they still worked. 3 years. 3 years since the department chair had closed the observatory, temporarily for renovations, that never came. 3 years since she'd been escorted out by campus security for refusing to leave the control room. 3 years since she'd started sneaking back at night with a stolen keycard and a thermos of terrible coffee, because someone had to keep watch. Tonight the forecast had promised an 11-minute window between fronts. 11 minutes when the jet stream would shove the cloud deck aside just long enough for the mountain to breathe. She had marked the date on every calendar she owned, in red ink that bled when her hand shook too hard. Mara climbed the 3 creaking steps to the observing chair worn smooth by decades of astronomers who'd sat right here chasing their own ghosts, and lowered herself into it. The vinyl split under her weight, exhaling a puff of dust. She didn't bother wiping the eyepiece, fingerprints were the least of the telescope's problems. Instead she coaxed the ancient drive motors awake with the same soft curses and half-remembered commands she'd used when she was 24 and invincible. The dome shutter groaned open a hand's breadth at a time, metal screaming against metal. Cold, wet air rushed in, carrying the scent of pine and distant lightning. She didn't look up yet. She couldn't. If the clouds were still there, if the window had already closed, she wasn't sure she had the strength to start another 3-year vigil. A single drop slid down the inside of the dome and landed on the back of her neck, icy as betrayal. She shivered, then forced her eye to the eyepiece. Nothing but gray. She counted heartbeats. 10, 20, 30. Then, like a theater curtain yanked aside by an impatient god, the clouds tore open. Stars spilled across the breach in reckless handfuls. The Milky Way arched overhead, brighter than she remembered, almost accusatory. Mara's fingers flew across the paddle controller, slewing the telescope to the coordinates she still dreamed in. Right ascension 03 hours 19 minutes 48 seconds, declination plus 27 degrees 14 minutes 22 seconds. Numbers she had whispered into her pillow on nights when grief tasted metallic. Numbers she had tattooed inside her wrist the day the review board laughed her out of the room. The field of view slid across star clusters and dark nebulae, across emptiness that had mocked her for 31 years. She nudged the declination slower, slower, breath held so long her lungs burned. There, a pinpoint moving against the fixed background. Not the steady crawl of a satellite, not the lazy drift of a high-altitude balloon. This was something older, colder, indifferent to human deadlines. It crossed the field in 4 seconds and kept going, serene as a verdict. Mara pulled back from the eyepiece as if it had burned her. Her hands shook so badly the image in the finder scope jittered like a dying heartbeat. She forced herself to look again, longer this time, letting the motion etch itself onto her retinas. Magnitude 17.8, maybe 17.9. Faint, but real, undeniably real. She knew its orbit the way other people knew their childhood prayers. She had calculated it on napkins in diner booths, on the backs of parking tickets, on the fogged mirror of a hospital bathroom the night her brother overdosed. A long-period comet that had shed its tail millions of years ago and become just another rock wandering the dark, returning every 11,326 days like a cosmic reminder that nothing is ever really gone. She had named it 1994 Voss Lambda the week after the funeral, when the sky felt like the only place big enough to hold her rage. The International Astronomical Union had refused to register it. Insufficient observations, they'd said. Probable plate defect. She had screamed at them until her voice gave out. Now here it was, sliding across the constellation Pisces like a slow bullet aimed at every doubter who'd ever lived. Mara pressed her forehead to the cold metal tube of the telescope and laughed once, sharp and cracked open, the sound bouncing around the dome until it didn't sound human anymore. Tears mixed with rainwater on her cheeks, she couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. The shutter motors whined, trying to close against the wind. She ignored them. Let the rain come in. Let the whole damn mountain flood. None of it mattered now. I told you he was real, she whispered to the dark, to the asteroid, to the brother who would never hear her. I told you all. High above, 1994 Voss Lambda kept moving, carrying its borrowed name across the abyss, indifferent and eternal. For the first time in 11 minutes that felt like 11 lifetimes, Mara Voss breathed.